Hello, 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 beauties. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so excited because today we are going to dive deep into the sister wound. We're going to explore what it is, its roots, how it shows up, different patterns, how it can also live within our bodies, and how it lives in collective dynamics of women. But before we dive in depth in all of this, I would really love to open this circle in honor of all the women who came before us, of all the women who walked beside us, and of all the women yet to be born. We are doing this collective work, not just for ourselves, not just to bring to wholeness our own parts that have been fragmented, that are exiled, but also for the collective. And so may we heal what was broken. May we all remember what was lost. And may we all reclaim power through love and true sisterhood. And so I would love to first start exploring a little bit the sister wound and its roots. And so, what do I mean by the sister wound? What is this? So, the sister wound is the wounding and the pain and the mistrust that can arise and happen between women. It often comes from many different things, but the major reasons for this wounding, one of the biggest ones is the internalized patriarchal programming. And so, again, that can show up as comparison, scarcity, disempowerment, because we have all lived and still live in a very masculine world, and it's playing by very masculine rules, and we have all internalized those rules within ourselves that live in our collective psyche, including in sisterhoods. Another core reason for this wounding, why it comes up, is historical trauma. Again, historically, there is so much wounding between women. There is the wounding of betrayal, of exile, of violence that is passed down epigenetically in our lineage. There is also unhealed personal experiences, right, that can really contribute to the sisterhood wound. And so, again, this is something that got imprinted and patterns that get passed down, and lived experiences with female peers in the family, especially the mother figure. And that leads me to the mother wound. The mother wound is such a big part of the sisterhood wound because our very first imprint of what it's like to be in the feminine energy, what feminine energy is about, comes from our imprint and our relationship with our mother figure. And so whatever is imprinted by our mother figure is going to ripple into our relationship with other women and can then contribute to the sisterhood wound. And so again, it's coming from the early relationship with the mother figure that we project onto other women. And the last reason is our own disconnection from the divine feminine energy, and that again is often coming because of internalized patriarchal programming. And so the sister wound is not just coming from like a psychological level. There is many layers to the sister wound, and it's also ancestral, it's also cultural, it is somatic, like it lives within our bodies, in our nervous systems, and it is also spiritual and energetic, and we are going to go and explore each and every one of them. However, before we do that, I would love to explore a little bit, just that you start becoming aware of the core sister wounds and then the resulting patterns of how it shows up and the patterns that this specific wounding creates. And so when we have the sisterhood wound, it can show up in different types of woundings. Okay, so it's not just like one wound. It's a one wound, but has many different manifestations, and each one of those manifestations then creates resulting patterns. So I'm going to give you 5 of them, and the patterns that they create, just so that you can start observing, do I carry this? Is this something, is this a type of wounding archetype that shows up in me? Or maybe you will right away observe it in women around you. And what I would love to bring to all of our attention, when you observe this wounding, this is not about, especially in others, but within ourselves as well, this is not about creating shame or, flagellating ourselves for carrying the wounding. I think we need so much deep compassion, because we all, all women, we have these woundings in one shape or form, because we've all inherited, we've all been grown in the same system. Or not to also, shame the other woman and try to put ourselves on a pedestal to feel superior to her, to flatter our own ego. This is just about observing and alchemizing and bringing the deepest levels of compassion to those programs, because it's not easy to navigate and it can be very, very tender. So just hold yourself with compassion. And so the wound could be, I am not safe with other women. Okay, so if any frequency of that sort or any thoughts of that sort come up, there's definitely pointing that there is a core sister wound playing out somewhere. And the pattern that this creates is, when we are in group dynamics, when we are with other women, is mistrust, distancing, and isolating ourselves from other women. This is the classical case of like the tomboy girl who only has male friends and is like, I don't hang out with women, they're too much drama, I only want to be with men because it's so straightforward. That is a classical example of deep down sister wound of, I am not safe with other women. Another manifestation of this core sister wound is, there is not enough for all of us, right? And so this is deep competition, jealousy, hoarding success, hoarding attention, hoarding whatever it is, like something that it comes with this frequency of not enough, right? And this comes from deep masculine patriarchal programming, because the patriarchal programming, the masculine programming, is very linear, it's very competition based, it's very survival based. And the feminine is very much collaboration based. When the masculine is like, I need to divide and conquer, I need to secure a part for myself, the feminine is like, oh, how can we collaborate together to amplify? And so when we are disconnected from our feminine, when we don't trust the feminine, when we don't trust other women, when there is not in like this mentality of not enough for all of us, we're in our masculine, we're not in our feminine, we're rejecting the true power of the feminine. So the next one is, I'll be judged or excluded if I shine. And so again, this creates a pattern of behavior where we are hiding our gifts, where we might be shrinking ourselves, or we might have imposter syndrome. And so if you're observing any of those behaviors within yourself, there might be some underlining story of, I'll be judged or excluded if I shine too bright. And so we collapse our signal, we collapse our energetic frequency, not to receive some kind of punishment. And this again comes from deep sister wounding, where if I shine too much, I will be exiled. And this is from ancestral programming. Another one that can come up is, I must be perfect to be loved. That's another big one. And the pattern that comes up with this is comparison, harsh criticism, and especially self-criticism, when we criticize ourselves so harshly, and a lot of mask wearing and a lot of pretending to be somebody else, or not being fully ourselves, not allowing ourselves to be fully seen. A lot of performance, very performative patterns. And so again, this is often tied to, and I'm going to go more in depth on this later, but this can be very deeply tied to the mother wound, because the core of the feminine energy is the unconditional love. And this is the, if our mothers, if all of our mothers would be so in integrity with their own feminine energy, which, we all know it's probably not there. That's not the majority of cases. If they would be fully in their feminine, the message and the imprint we would receive as children is, you are unconditionally loved and lovable, and there is nothing that you need to do to deserve more love. And so, because so many of us did not receive that initial imprint of the feminine, we associated that to be loved, especially to be loved by our mother, we need to, I don't know, get good grades, behave in a certain way, perform in a certain way, and then we're allowed to be loved, and then we will be lovable, because the love felt conditional to our inner child. And so that then results in this imprint and wounding that I must be perfect to be loved, or I have to have some kind of condition to be worthy of love. And it goes on into those patterns of comparison with other women, comparison with even sometimes ourselves, but not in a healthy way. A lot of harsh self-criticism or projected outward criticism of other women, because the way we speak about other women is almost always a mirror about how we speak to ourselves. And a lot of mask wearing and pretending and performing. And that brings us to the last core wounding, which is love is conditional. So the love is conditional when we again didn't receive the fullness of unconditional feminine motherly love. The imprint of love is conditional is a little bit different from the previous ones, because this one shows up in a pattern of overgiving. Like, I need to deserve to be loved. I need to do something over the top. I need to give. I need to self-sacrifice myself. There's a lot of people's pleasing, and that can lead to a lot of burnout as well, because we don't honor our boundaries, because honoring our boundaries didn't feel safe. If I would set boundaries, I would be rejected. So let's go deeper into each one of those causes for the sisterhood wounding. So what is the internalized patriarchal programming? So the patriarchal programming is basically programming that refers to a set of beliefs, social structures, and cultural norms that are created within systems of masculine dominance, systems that historically really prioritized masculine coded traits. And the masculine coded traits are often things like logic, control, productivity, independence, competition, performance. It's a very linear energy. It is a lot about doing. And at the same time, those same systems also devalued or suppressed feminine coded ones. And so the feminine codes are intuition, they're the emotional expression, emotional intelligence, the sensuality, the pleasure, the receptivity. Also, it's the relationality, or ability to build communities, to build relationships, collaboration. And it is feeling and being as opposed to doing and performing. It's like, oh, how much can I feel? How much can I be in the experience? Not because there is some kind of goal I need to, like, or outcome I need to achieve, but just because I am here for feeling, experiencing those things. And so when we create systems and structures where the masculine is highly prioritized and at the same time the feminine is repressed and devalued, these programmings then get internalized. And it means that these external power structures are absorbed and embedded within our own individual psyche, within our own nervous system, and also within our own identities. And that often happens unconsciously. So we might unconsciously internalize a program in our code where the masculine is seen as more valid, as above the feminine. Like a classical example, if you are trusting only science and only like, okay, critical thinking, rational, logical, it is somehow more valid, more important than the mystical, than the intuitive, where you don't give yourself permission to step into your intuition, to your own mysticism, to your own inner oracle and inner knowing, because it's somehow not valid. This is a classical example of the masculine being prioritized within your own psyche versus the feminine. The same thing, if you want like a quick rule of thumb, if you find yourself often doing so much that you feel like you might burn out and not giving yourself permission to experience pleasure, not giving yourself permission to rest, that is also an example of over present an over identification and over valorization of the masculine codes versus the feminine. However, if you do find yourself, like as a rule of thumb, in the space where like you dream and you have so many projects and you have so many things, but nothing ever gets manifested, that's the flip side. That's the over prioritization of the feminine and probably some wounding around the masculine where the discipline, the structure doesn't feel safe. The way that I see it is that the masculine and feminine are really like 2 feet that are supposed to be used together for us to walk. And very often one is prioritized in our society. And so we can like just leap on, on one foot. And the goal is really to integrate both of them, not shame any of them. Both of them are so precious, so important. It's like, how can we help them work together and stand hand in hand together? And so when we internalized those patriarchal masculine systems and we in return repress the feminine within ourselves, for women this often results in then self-regulation, suppression, and distortion of their authentic feminine expression. And then that also sips into fractured relationship with other women. And so how is the sister wound and patriarchal patterns are passed down through the maternal lineage? And so there is a few ways they get passed down. Today we're going to go into 4 of them. So one of them is through modeling and behavior. And this, I call it more like the psychological transmission. So this is like literally exploring our, the psychological effect of these patterns and this wounding and how it gets transmitted to us. The second one is through epigenetics and somatic memory. And this is literally like the biological transmission. Then there is the unresolved emotional patterns. And this is more like the relational transmissions and have a lot to do with some energetics, but also some relationships. And then the last one is through adolescent female dynamics and peer conditioning, which is again also another form of the relational transmissions. So let's go dive deeper into each one of them. So number 1, let's explore the modeling and behavior, which is the psychological transmission. So from a very, very young age, we learn about what it means to be a woman, not just through what we are told, but mostly through what we witness in women who raise us. What do we observe? What do we learn from them? And kids, I love saying that, they don't learn from what we say. They learn from who we are being and what we do. And I know I have 2 kids. That definitely has been like a big mirror in my life. So, for example, if your mother constantly, let's say, compared herself to other women, what may have happened is that your inner child internalized that women are some kind of rivals, they're not allies, and we cannot trust them. If your mother, for example, feared being judged and she was preoccupied and really worried about who will say what, how will she appear to others, or maybe she self-sacrificed and didn't put boundaries and just did a lot of people's pleasing, for others to comfort them, to not get rejected by them. What our inner child may have learned from observing that behavior is that you need to, in order to belong, you need to self-abandon. And so if you don't self-abandon, you will not belong. Another example of this relational transmission of the feminine energy is if, for example, your mother judged or resented or distrusted a lot other women, then again, those beliefs get internalized as like something that is absolutely truth. Okay, so your inner child doesn't know that this is your mother's wounding. It doesn't know that it's your mother's patterns that probably got passed to her through her mother and her mother and her mother. Literally, our inner child thinks that this is the ultimate truth. And so before we're like even old enough to question them. And so I really hope that if you are here, this is because you do want to question those things, and we should be questioning them and we should be alchemizing them if it does not serve us. And so really those unsaid modeled messages get passed down. And so it could be like, Okay, so to be accepted, I must not be too visible, or I can't trust other women, they will hurt me. Or if I want to be loved, then I must shrink, I must serve, I must self abandon, I must suppress myself. And so, even if our mothers were deeply loving, even if they did their best, they can still transmit these patterns unconsciously. Okay, especially if they themselves were not allowed to express the fullness of their feminine power, and especially if they themselves were not conscious of them. So, the second way that this wounding gets, transmitted to us through patriarchy is through the epigenetics and the somatic memory. And so the epigenetics and somatic memory is literally the memory of our body, our nervous system, and it's really the biological energetic transmission, because like I said, there is a lot of things that are passed on to us from our ancestors. And so especially now, there is a lot of scientific research that is happening around the field of epigenetics. And it is being shown more and more that trauma, that fear, that emotional suppression can really be passed down to us across generations. Not just in, behavior, like the learned forms and patterns of behavior that maybe we saw our mothers do or our grandmothers do and we internalized, but literally how our nervous systems respond to the world based on how our ancestors, what they went through, the trauma they experienced. And that gets coded literally in our genes and in our nervous systems. And so your nervous system may carry this imprint of ancestral experiences, such as, for example, the witch hunt, which is being burned or exiled. And this hits home for so many women. If you own your inner spiritual side, if you own your inner gnosis, your inner knowing, your mystical side, something bad will happen and your whole nervous system maybe contracts and goes into fear mode, and you might not understand it rationally. Like, why does it rationally do it? Why am I rationally so afraid of this? And perhaps because this is not stemming from this lifetime, and perhaps because this is not rational. Maybe this is, ancestral epigenetic memory that runs in your lineage. There is also women betrayed by their sisters to survive. This is big, and I'm holding this with just so much gentleness and so much compassion, because we are all in this together. Okay. And so especially when the theme of beauty, when the theme of youth, when the theme of like this feminine competition comes through, it can be so deeply tender, because for the longest time women had no rights. We didn't have the right to education, we didn't have the right to work, and so our only means of literally survival was, how can I secure a man who can protect and provide for me, and who can protect and provide my children. And so back in those days, one of the most secure ways we had is to traffic our beauty, is to traffic our youth, is to traffic our sexuality to secure that. And so when we see other women who we might perceive like, oh, maybe she's too beautiful, or she's more beautiful than me, or she's younger than me, or she's whatever, like whatever patriarchal systems implanted in our subconscious, that those are the criteria we need to measure ourselves by to be worthy for men, for the gaze, for the masculine gaze, we internalized, right? And then whenever this is threatened by the presence of another woman, we might go into deep wounding, not because we actually intentionally want to hurt the other woman, but because our nervous system is reacting. Our nervous system thinks, oh, I might die in her presence if she's the one who secures the protection, if she's the one who secures the man, right? And so this is not logical. This is not necessarily even what we would love to, stand for. But sometimes those dynamics can play in our nervous system. And so this is a beautiful invitation of realizing if any of those patterns are running within yourself, and meet them with deep compassion. And also, if you see that dynamic running in another woman, even if it's towards us, I'm not saying don't set boundaries, but just hold it with compassion as well. We are all in this together. And so again, and women betrayed by their sisters to survive, it could also be, maybe we needed to denounce each other to survive. Like, especially witch hunts and witch trials, we needed to accuse each other so that we don't get burned, so that our families don't get destroyed, right? It's like this intentional pitting of women against women, because our biggest power is the community and collaboration. Our true nature is this collaborative, amplifying force. And we were forced into a masculine program where we needed to pit, each other against each other and destroy and tear down each other. And so all of this is still, oh, I'm having shivers just speaking about this. All of this is still deeply wound up in our nervous system and passed on epigenetically until we decide to break those patterns and we decide to become the sacred cycle breakers. And if you are here, I'm pretty sure this is what you stand for. Another way that this shows up is, again, mothers forced to conform to patriarchal roles or abandon their truth, right? Again, it's not to blame our mothers or our grandmothers. They were doing their best, right? And they were forced sometimes to fit into those patriarchal norms and to patriarchal roles. And then that gets passed down to us, that we need to fit into the mold. If not, something bad will happen to us. And again, this is maybe generations of women who learned that safety equals silence, right? And silence, even just like suppressing our voice, we automatically are also suppressing our sexual power. And by suppressing our sexual power, we automatically suppress our voices, because the two of them are connected. There is a direct link between our yoni and our throats. They have mirror structures. There's the vagus nerve that connects our womb and our throat. There is so many things. And usually when you have a contracted throat, when you don't allow yourself to truly use your voice, your yoni is contracting. When your yoni is contracted, when it's in fear, when there's a lot of shame, trauma stuck in the tissues of your yoni, it also mirrors our voice. If ever this is something that interests you, we can definitely reach out. I would love to support you on that. And I have a little mini class around this connection and reopening this energetic channel. If it's something that calls you, please do reach out, let me know. But I just wanted to bring this in, that this is something that is so present and it is transmitted from women to women to women to women in our generation, in our generations, in our lineages, and it is something that is often coded into our nervous system. And so these inherited patterns, they live in our bodies, and they can show up as, for example, hypervigilance in group settings. They can show up as a freeze response around being seen or praised, because, oh my goodness, this is not safe for me to be seen. And what if I'm praised and then somebody will try to destroy me, right? This doesn't feel safe. Or, maybe another way it can show up in our nervous system is like chronic self-doubt and comparison, because we learned that we should always be competing with each other. We should always be comparing each other to each other, right? To stay safe, to be the chosen one. There is also deep fear of female authority figures or feminine power. Women in power could be so scary, because what if they try to tear us down, right? And so we don't trust, we are afraid of female authority power. And then by consequence, because there is this deep fear, we're also so afraid of stepping into power and being in a feminine authority power. And so a lot of women then stay in the cycle and loop in this disempowerment. And this is literally the energetic imprint of betrayal that is running and short-circuiting and hacking your nervous system. And so even if you didn't consciously experience betrayal from another woman or exile from a feminine community, perhaps your own body still carries this ancestral echo and still carries this ancestral imprint in your nervous system that you might not logically and rationally know where it's coming from or know how to explain, but your body just reacts. And so that could be an ancestral imprint. And so something that echoes or says along the lines of other women are not safe. If I stand out, I'll be cast out. I'll be exiled, I'll be rejected. And for me, it was like, I will be stoned, stoned to death, okay? Or hanged or decapitated or burned or something along those lines. So if any of those imprints show up in your nervous system and you have a lot of anxiety, but you're not quite sure why, it's good to explore different reasons. Is it something relational? Is it something I learned from my mom? But if there's really no specific wounding that comes up, it could just be literally epigenetics and ancestral trauma playing out in your nervous system. All right, so the third way that it gets passed down is through unresolved emotional patterns. And this is what I really call more like the energetic and relational transmissions. And so, what does that mean? For example, our mothers and their mothers may have unconsciously projected their own wounds and unmet needs onto us. Okay. And so this might show up as something like they needed us to be good or to be modest or to be less than so that they feel secure. So if your mother has some kind of wounding and you were embodying that thing that she is wounded about, perhaps she needed you to tone that down so her own wounding doesn't come up. Obviously, most of the time, this is not conscious. So she was not consciously trying to bring you down or make you constrict. It's just her own wounding was unintegrated and was not conscious. And so instead of addressing her own wounding, she tried to minimize your light so that her wounding doesn't get triggered and activated. And so that she can feel more secure. Another, thing that maybe our mothers did unintentionally or intentionally in maybe more severe cases, but it's competing with us for attention or validations. If ever we felt any dynamic of competition from the mother, okay, also discouraging our sensuality, our sexuality. This is so present for so many women. In some way, it was even present within myself. I don't think my mother ever consciously or openly discouraged my sensuality, my sexuality, but it was always like a bit of a taboo subject. And I actually received validation and praise for being so conservative, right? So not easy, so closed. And there is value in this, and this is a whole other topic we can talk about. But my inner adolescent understood that, oh, for me to be worthy, I cannot go into my sexuality because this was what was praised by my mother. And so even if there was no actual discouraging of sensuality, there was a big encouraging. So I automatically, my inner adolescent made the connection like, oh, okay, so then I need to be discouraged. My sexuality needs to be discouraged. There was definitely a lot of reclamation on that level. And so again, this probably stems from my own mother's, disconnection from her sexual power. And so again, this was not done purposefully, but she didn't know how to navigate that. And she continued this imprint and projected that on me that I took on. My inner adolescent took that on. This is a similar pattern that could come up with ambition, because again, generally speaking, culturally, ambitious women are not well seen, right? Like we should not be too ambitious. It's good to be ambitious, but not too ambitious. And that could get triggering because, oh, what if a powerful woman comes along? The same thing with emotional intensity. You should be palatable. You should be good, right? So you're not able or allowed to have those big emotions. You're not allowed to have anger or rage, right? Like especially not rage, but rage is so sacred. And, there's a big part of reclaiming also the sacredness of our rage, because our rage shows us where our boundaries are not met. Another topic I could go in depth on, but let's go back to the mother projection. And so whatever pattern we might have in us as children or as adolescents that may have triggered their own repressions, most probably, unless our mothers were super conscious, they try to then minimize in us. And so what this does is that it can create like a very deep energetic and relational enmeshment. Okay. And so when enmeshment happens is that we start as children, we start learning that we are responsible for the feelings of others. We are now responsible for the feelings of my mother, for example, like, oh, okay, so if I am showing this part, she will get upset. So then I need to manage myself to manage her feelings because she was not fully sovereign in her feelings. She projected herself on the child. And so the child learns that, okay, I'm over responsible. I'm not responsible for the feelings of my mother. And so we get enmeshed. And what happens when we get enmeshed is we don't know where we finish and where the other person begins. And so it is very enmeshed and very difficult to navigate and sometimes very difficult to untangle, especially if we have been enmeshed for a very long time and we might recreate those patterns in other relationships. Another thing that might come up is the guilt. The guilt when we succeed, the guilt when we're too sexual, the guilt when we shine and take up space. It could be a fear of surpassing or outgrowing the women who came before us. And I'm going to go a little bit into ancestral work here. The biggest attachment and loyalty we all have within ourselves is to our family clan. This is, this is the hardest one often to break, the family clan loyalty. Okay. And so sometimes that might look like I am not allowed to be more successful than they are. I'm not allowed to be more free than they are. I'm not allowed because then I'm breaking some kind of code, some kind of inherent pattern, some kind of energetic frequency. I'm stepping outside of it and I'm breaking this. And that can create a lot of havoc and a lot of, I'm rocking the boat of what is running in the lineage. And, to us, being exiled from our lineage, from our family blood tribe to our nervous system, that literally feels like death. And so, even subconsciously, we have big loyalty programs to our lineage, even if what we're being loyal to is completely disbalanced or it's completely not serving us or them. There is still a lot of fears. There is a lot of conscious work that needs to happen and regulating our nervous system and bringing in safety and not being stuck in this kind of trap of loyalty, because there are ways to break this agreement and still maintain the love. And so the energetic consequence of this is that we may hold ourselves back, not only to fit with the other women, but also to stay loyal to the feminine line. And usually, if this is something that is running in your field, you will right away recognize it. Just as I said, it will probably be like, yeah, I see it, I know it. All right. And so the fourth way that those dynamics and this sisterhood wounding gets passed to us through this like patriarchal systems is through adolescent female dynamics and peer conditioning. And this is like very relationship based transmissions. And so again, our earliest experiences of female friendships and groups of belonging really come in childhood and in adolescence, particularly in school environments. And these school environments and these dynamics really shape our core beliefs about sisterhood, about trust, about visibility. I went to an all-girls Catholic school. And so trust me, I have experienced all the shapes and forms of sisterhood wounding out there. And these are difficult dynamics to navigate. These are very, very tricky and difficult dynamics to navigate. There is like this modesty, obedience, perfection, hierarchy, so many things happen in those dynamics. And especially in those formative years where we are not fully strong in our core, strong in who we are, strong in our values and our beliefs. And so it makes it like double difficult or triple difficult. And so I'm sure I'm not the only one. And I think, some of the dynamics that can really show up in those environments is like being excluded or judged by other girls for being too quiet, too loud, too much, too little, too different, too expressive, too sexual, too this, too that, too something. Okay. And so there's this fear of being excluded, being judged for some kind of perceived inadequacy within ourselves. Then there is also the popularity, right? The popularity or the praise. The praise is often linked to conformity because conformity is usually a big theme that runs in those, adolescent dynamics. And so we all need to conform. We all need to look like each other and be like each other. There's certain beauty archetypes that need to be respected. There is some kind of values that everybody needs to conform with. And the moment you don't conform, you are probably going to get rejected and excluded, right? And so that also creates some kind of silent hierarchies among peers. And so if you don't conform, if you don't stay in, those hierarchies, if you are too different, what can happen is that there's like, again, this possibility of being shamed. There's this possibility of being teased. And that blended with like developing bodies, sexuality explorations, finding ourselves, that is a very explosive combo. Again, like there is so many also underlining currents of competition that is masked as friendship, right? Where closeness could turn into betrayal and gossip and rivalry, like literally overnight. There is also a lot of receiving mixed messages from authority figures at the same time as we're navigating all of this of like, okay, you need to be modest and kind, but also you need to achieve and perform and succeed. You also need to be this and you also need to be that. And so, there's just so much happening at the same time, and there is so much internal division and so much setting up for perfectionism and trying to fit in, but also trying to find out who you are at the same time, and so much fear. And so what happens is that this can create a lot of mistrust in female friendships, okay? And there can be like this tendency to seek male validation over female connection. There's big fear of vulnerability, of sharing emotions, of standing out amongst women, because what if I get betrayed, rejected, gossiped, right? There's this habit of comparing because we need to fit into the status quo, right? There's comparing, there's performing, a lot of performance and a lot of shrinking, especially like those very feminine dominant spaces. And it might develop this belief that closeness with women always carries some kind of inherent risk and eventually will end up in betrayal and exile, okay? And so all of these are things that show up in a lot of teenage girls group. And even sometimes, if those wounds were not integrated, they get carried out into adult women interactions, especially in like workspaces where there's a lot of women. If you're holding containers with a lot of women, if you're creating spaces for women, all of those dynamics can come up. So this is a lot about being conscious of them. And so what I would love to bring up is that, it's very easy if you experienced any of those patterns. And me growing up, I experienced a lot of bullying. I experienced a lot of exclusion from women. There were times in my life where like, I literally had no one to sit with at lunch. And I was always the very quiet girl and very, very shy. And so what I want to bring to your attention set, if we don't integrate those woundings, it is so easy to stay stuck in them and stay looping in them. But I would love to explain that, what happens from an energetic perspective is that adolescents, like young children and adolescents, they get parachuted into those environments where the kids and adolescents, they don't have any tools. They were never taught emotional intelligence. And they are looking to belong, and they're also looking to not be rejected. They're afraid. They're all insecure. And so they co-create these very toxic, unstable environments where everybody loses and everybody is afraid, and no one comes to help them. Because the adults, the parents are like, well, I figured it out, they'll figure it out. And the question is like, did you really? Did you really integrate all of those things? And the teachers who are supposed to be the guides so often are absolutely not educated on adolescent psychology and how to help create safe dynamics within groups. And so when they see those dynamics play out, what happens that in the teachers and adults who are responsible for them, often it mirrors and reactivates their own teenage wounds. And so they shut down and they just don't want to deal with it. Or they act as teenagers themselves because their inner teenager takes the wheel and plays into this dynamic. And so, it's just not a safe place for any of the groups, because maybe the bully, they might be bullying, but they're bullying because they're themselves very afraid. They're operating from this deep fear of rejection and not belonging. And so what they do is that they use control and exclusion and intimidation to secure a place on the top of social hierarchy, because themselves, they often project their own insecurities and they project their own inner chaos outwards rather than feeling vulnerable. They avoid vulnerability. And this is the perfect example of the masculine structure and disconnect from the feminine, right? And so maybe they have learned at home that power equals dominance and not that connection, right? Connection can be powerful too, but they learn that power, the only way to power is dominance, and they never learn about connection. And so unconsciously, they reenact that model and they just try to feel safe. And I'm not justifying them, but this is the pattern. This is they are in fear. They're also feeling they're not belonging. They're afraid of losing control, and that's the only tool that they learned. And the same thing for the person who's bullied. The person who's bullied is often, the boy or girl who is a little bit different, who's maybe a little bit more sensitive, who is more emotionally open. And so they become the target, right? They become the target. And because they become the target, then they kind of represent of what can happen to you. And so all the other bystanders, they're so afraid that they're going to be next, including the bully, that it just creates this very skewed dynamic where sometimes well, I'd rather attack first than be attacked, because we are all in this group. Every single party is afraid and no one gives them tools. And so I am so, so happy to see that there is so much more conscious places and conscious schools and conscious academic environments being created, and more interventions and more education happening to prevent those dynamics. And those dynamics don't need to exist if we bring in more consciousness and we integrate this, and we as adults also help the teenagers and educate them on emotional intelligence and group dynamics and how to navigate those things. And that starts with us integrating those wounds. And so, like I said, both are victims of the same unconscious system that values conformity over authenticity, that values performance over vulnerability, and that values survival over connection. And these are all masculine programs. And so this is not to say that the masculine is bad. The masculine program, when it's unintegrated and used out of fear, can have very destructive consequences. So these are the ways that those woundings, the sisterhood wound, gets created in us. Okay. And this is how those internalized patriarchy fuels the sister wound. And so, for example, if we have any of those woundings, the sister wound in general, it really thrives in environments where women have been taught to see each other as competition rather than like beautiful community, or understanding the power of community and collaboration, where women are taught to suppress their intuition, to suppress their emotional truth, to suppress their sensuality to be acceptable, where women disown their power, where women disown their voice, their authentic expression, their embodiment, their leadership, just to avoid social punishment. And so what happens is that rather than direct control and direct external oppression, internalized patriarchy, once we internalize those programs, it leads women to police themselves and then also to police each other. And in that way, it continues to uphold that patriarchal system that we never chose. And so the only way to break those cycles is to bring awareness and consciousness within where those patterns and programs and woundings are playing out within ourselves. Have deep compassion. And when you witness it in another woman, also have deep compassion with her. We are all in this together. And so how do those internalized patriarchal programs, how do they play out in action? Like if you would observe them playing out in yourself or in the women, especially if you're holding feminine communities, you might notice them. And I think it's so important to notice them so that you understand what is truly happening, what is playing underneath. So, number one, like one way it shows up is subtle competition for male attention or approval. Okay. So even among conscious and spiritual women, there can be unconscious drive to win. Okay. Especially in areas that have historically earned validation from the masculine, because we still value the masculine above the feminine within ourselves. And so that can show up as being the most beautiful, again, to secure the masculine, to secure safety, right? Being the most desirable, the most accomplished, the most balanced, the most something woman in the room, right? The most expert woman in the room, the most knowledgeable woman in the room. It could be feeling triggered when another woman receives admiration or praise, because again, this is like this scarcity of, okay, if she gets it, then I don't get it, right? Like there is not enough for both of us. It could also be withdrawing love or connection from a sister who is shining or who is expressing her sexuality, right? Like, do you shrink yourself or do you withdraw yourself and push her away for that, right? Or do you observe that dynamic in the groups you're holding or the women around you? And so, if you see any of those patterns show up, the internalized belief is probably her success or her beauty or her sexuality or her whatever it is threatens my worth, threatens my desirability, threatens my success, threatens my safety, right? There is only room for one of us. And so this then creates this scarcity mindset where collaboration feels unsafe. And visibility is really becoming, instead of being this source of joy and celebration, it becomes this source of tension and competition. Okay. Another way those patterns can show up in actual life is judging or distancing or excluding women who embody repressed feminine traits. And so many women were conditioned to believe that being too emotional, being too sensual, being too loud, being too mystical, being too something makes them unsafe, makes them undesirable, makes them untrustworthy. So when another woman expresses those traits that we repressed within ourselves, be it power, be it sexuality, be it, speaking our truth, it can feel threatening to us. Not because she's doing harm, not because she's doing something bad, but because she reflects to us an exiled part of ourselves. And when we see that, we either have the invitation to acknowledge this, to hold ourselves with love, with compassion, and witness it, and do the inner work to reintegrate and to heal that part of ourselves, which can be very tender and very scary. And this is the depth of shadow work. And so, if we're not conscious, the easiest way sometimes that our ego has to protect us from hurting and from feeling this tenderness and this pain is to project it on the other woman, right? And tell, no, she's too much. She's too sexual. She is too loud. She's too powerful. She's too this, she's too that. But this is often just, whenever you see that pattern come up, it's often mirroring to us an exiled part of ourselves. But it also means we have that in ourselves. We can get whatever it is that we see in her that feels so threatening to us. And so it can show up as dismissing a sister as too much, or like attention seeking or fake or dramatic. And again, feeling this resentment or this discomfort when a woman leads, when a woman is in her sexual power, when a woman is in her, leadership and authenticity, can feel very uncomfortable. And so maybe we even avoid relationships with women who feel too intimidating or too confident or too sexual. And I would love to invite you to look, who are the women around you? Are you avoiding some type of women, or do you have those women in your orbit? That will probably tell you sometimes your own blind spots in terms of what are you exiling within yourself. And so the internalized belief with this could be, it's not safe to be fully expressed. It's not safe to be fully sexual. It's not safe to be fully using my voice, or fully in my power, or fully in my light. Because if I am too much, maybe I will be deemed as dangerous. Or maybe if a woman is doing that, she's dangerous, right? And so that plays into the next kind of pattern. The way it shows up is the self-censorship, is the fear of rejection from other women, right? Because they're going hand in hand together. If we reject and exile and censor that in other women, oof, it's going to be hard for us to embody those parts within ourselves. And so many women, again, carry this deep fear of being judged, of being gossiped about, of being exiled, of being excluded by other women. And not only due to like personal experiences in the past, but also because they do the same thing to other women. So it is always a mirror. And also because of ancestral and cultural memory. So, like I mentioned, the witch wound, the hunts, the exiles, the familiar punishment maybe for nonconformity. And so this can really manifest as not sharing your spiritual gifts, not sharing your, your erotic nature, not sharing your sensuality, not sharing your creative work, the fullness of your creativity. And, life force, sexuality, creativity, our ability to receive, they're all the same frequency. It's all around the womb. And our connection to the feminine is receptive, the feminine is sensual, the feminine is creative. And so there's this big fear of, what will other women think? What if I get exiled? Right? And so we're silencing our intuition, we're silencing our erotic nature, we're downplaying our leadership and our light to fit in, and we're self abandoning in doing so. Or another way that this could show up is completely avoid intimate relationship with women. Like, I don't trust women, I don't want to hang out with them. And avoid spaces where emotional vulnerability is invited, because then I will have to see all those parts within myself. And so the internalized belief here is, if I'm seen in my truth for who I really am, in my fullness, other women will attack or abandon me. And this is how the inner witch wound, the exile wound, and the sister wound, this is how they all intersect, right? Because we are afraid of other women. We are afraid of being exiled. We're afraid of our own mysticism, of being our true magical selves, right? We're afraid of being rejected. And so I just want to give a few other examples of how the rejection of the feminine lives within ourselves. Just that you start notice if you carry that, because the rejection of the feminine energy within ourselves will definitely play out in our connection and our interactions with other women. And so it could be the disconnection from our body and our pleasure. So if we're constantly living in our heads, if we're constantly thinking forward, we're projecting ourselves forward, we're escaping the body, we're always thinking forward or backwards. We could all be like ruminating on the past, but we're not fully present in the now. We don't give ourselves permission to descend into the body. We're mostly living in our head, disconnecting from our somatic intelligence, from the pleasure, from our sensuality. Maybe we feel shame or discomfort around our sexual energy, around our bodily pleasure. There is no space or time for us to be in pleasure, to feel pleasure. It's more like, oh, if pleasure occasionally happens, good, but I'm not going to cultivate that in my daily life, right? Another way that shows up, this disconnect from our feminine energy, is to override our menstrual cycle. Maybe we're completely disconnected from our menstrual cycles. Maybe we don't honor them. Maybe we override them and try to, drive ourselves in this very masculine, linear way of being. There's maybe a lot of exhaustion, burnout, and maybe a lot of pressure to keep up with this linear productivity. And our bodies were never meant to be linear. We are not linear beings. And so do you create spaciousness to know your cycle, to honor your cycle, to connect to your cycle? It could also be feeling unsafe in embodiment practices or sensual movement. Like, how freely can your body move? How connected are you to your body's intelligence, to your soma, to your inner wild woman, right? And so, again, the core belief when we're rejecting our feminine from that perspective is my body is shameful, my body is dangerous, it's unreliable, it must be controlled, I want to escape my body. And it's always living in our heads and not in our bodies. And the other aspect of, a rejection of the feminine is fear of being seen in spiritual or mystical gifts. Okay. So whenever the feminine is the oracle, the masculine, although it's very like structured and masculine, and linear, think of it as, the riverbed, it's the structure. And the feminine is the water that flows in the riverbed. And so they're supposed to work together. And so the water, it's the mystical. The feminine is the oracle. The feminine is the intuitive. And so if we're hiding our intuitive work, if we're hiding our, rituals, if we're hiding our, like, we're still like the, what I call the closet witch, or we think like, my spiritual beliefs are too much, they're too woo-woo, they're too weird, they're not credible somehow. If we are disowning or diluting our spiritual voice to stay palatable, or to stay professional, or we're dismissing our own psychic and energetic experience as not real enough, then we are definitely repressing and fragmenting our own psyche and exiling a part of our feminine energy. And so the core belief, again, it could be if I express the fullness of those gifts, I'll be rejected, or I'll be mocked, or I'll be exiled again. So when we have those wounds running, especially the mother wound, which is, in big part, like the root of a lot of the sisterhood wound, like we've seen before, what can happen is that when we are in group dynamics, a lot of interesting things can show up. Okay. And so if, a woman carries like this pain from her relationship with mother figure, and particularly if her mother was not available, if it was too critical, it was too overwhelmed, didn't model healthy, feminine embodiment and sovereignty and self-love, then what happens in adult relationships and in group dynamics is that we can be seeking validation, for example, from women or mentors, because we are subconsciously seeking the validation of our mother. We can be competing with other women, for male attention or approval, because this is maybe an imprint we received from the mother. We could project our mother onto women in the group, right? Another way that those dynamics can show up is like feel abandoned when others take space, or reject those who reflect parts of our own unclaimed power. And also sometimes the dynamics that you could observe, be it within yourself or if you're a space holder or like in feminine group dynamics, is attached to women as surrogate mothers, or rebel against them, because again we are replaying those mother dynamics with other women. And so basically the mother wound can really cause us to carry unconscious resentment or mistrust of women, and a deep craving for validation that is, at the same time paired with this fear of betrayal and fear of abandonment. And so what happens is then our unmet needs get projected onto friends, onto other girlfriends, onto mentors, and onto communities. And so healing that wound really allows us to clear this distortion so that we no longer looking for a mother or our mother in every woman and reenacting this dynamic of perhaps being too much or not enough or whatever wounding got imprinted on you. And we stop carrying this into those dynamics with other women around us, and we can start relating with them adult to adult, because as long as this wounding keeps playing in our psyche, it is our inner child dynamic playing out with a mother figure, right? And not adult to adult. And so when we integrate that, we can relate to others adult to adult, soul to soul, and sister to sister. And so healing the mother wound and healing the feminine and healing the sister wounding, it really allows us to be in our own energy. It really allows us to receive support from other women without collapsing, to celebrate other women, their power, their sexuality, their voice, without feeling threatened and without then rejecting them or withdrawing from them, to mother ourselves with love and strong, solid, sacred boundaries, and be a clean mirror, not a projection screen. And what I mean by clean mirror is that you can witness others as they are without confusing their behavior with our own past wounds. And so you're able to then hold space for the other women, be it in a like a professional setting or be it just like in your interpersonal relationships. You're really able to hold space for them without taking things personally or reacting defensively, because you're no longer playing those unhealed and unintegrated wounds within yourself. And so your nervous system then becomes deeply regulated, or at least regulated enough to offer neutrality, to offer compassion, to offer this clarity. But when we're being the projection screen and not the clear mirror, what happens is that instead of seeing the person clearly, we project our old unhealed stories onto them, often unconsciously, of course. Their actions can then like trigger our unresolved wounds, and then we react to what they represent, not to actually who they are and what they said, but to what they represent in our a wounded scenario. And this often leads to conflicts, to jealousy, to judgment, and to withdrawal. And so again, integration begins with awareness. When we start to see these patterns, and not as personal failures, like this is not about self-flagellating, but as just, inherited programming that we all, like most of us, received similar ways, shapes, or form of this programming, right? We then create the space for compassion. We create the space for choice and for change, and not for shame. We're all just humaning. Humaning is messy, humaning is challenging, and we are all doing our best. And so I would love to invite you into a little deep dive and practical integration of this sister wound, that you can realign those patterns within yourself and bring in more wholeness and more integration. And so I would love to invite you to do a little somatic inquiry into where you could potentially be holding a sister wound in your system. So I would love to invite you to close your eyes and drop into your body. Take a deep breath in. Hold it. And exhale. Another deep breath in. And as you're exhaling, allow your jaw to soften. Allow your shoulders to drop. And with every exhale, imagine yourself descending and landing deeper into your body. Another deep breath in and exhale. This constant cycle of giving and receiving, of exchange with life, that always anchors us in the present moment. As we breathe in, we receive of life. And as we breathe out, we offer a part of ourselves back to life. And I would love to invite you now to just feel into this question. What's a moment where I felt judged or excluded by another woman? And what did I believe about myself because of that experience? And when you ask yourself these two questions, what sensations come up in your body? Just breathe into that sensation. There is no need to fix anything, just note it, meet it with your awareness, observe it. Where in your body is the sensation held? This is the imprint of that experience in your nervous system. This is where the story, where this energetic imprint, this is where it lives in your body. And so just breathe deeper into it. And you can even place your hand there, because that deepens the connection, the somatic connection with that story and that place on your body. And as you place your hand and you gently guide your loving attention, say to that space and send the frequency to that space, into that story, into that imprint and pattern that lives in your body. Say to it, you are safe now. You belong. I will not abandon you. You are so safe. And as you're saying this, feel to what is happening in your nervous system. Before you put a story to it, before you explain it with the rational mind, drop into the nervous system and feel what is happening as you say those words in your nervous system. And this is how we little by little start rewiring the nervous system and bring the emotional charge to surface so that it can be seen, witnessed, alchemized, and reintegrated. And so that your nervous system remembers that it no longer has to carry that imprint, that you are now safe. And I would love to invite you to continue breathing deep into your body. But now imagine yourself descending into a grotto or a darkened room, and you're descending there deeper and deeper, feeling so safe and so held there. It's a very safe room, a very safe grotto, and you feel so held there. And now you see a version of you at the age that the wounding that you just touched began. How old is she? How old is she? Just take a moment to really witness her, to really see her. And when you're ready, come closer to that version of you, to that younger self, and tell her, you didn't imagine that. It wasn't in your head, it wasn't in your imagination. You were hurt. And now we are here to integrate this together. And I imagine behind that version of you, one by one, women begin to appear. It could be your ancestors, your grandmothers, great grandmothers. It could be soul sisters, feminine guides. Take a moment to really see who is showing up, forming a circle. They form a circle around the two of you. And you feel so held by these women, so deeply supported. You feel their power, you feel their love surrounding you. Their support, you can lean on them. You are so deeply held. And one by one, these women place their hand on your shoulders, on your back, and on the shoulders and the back of the younger version of you. And to tell the both of you, you belong. You are so loved, and your power is safe here. And allow yourself to fully receive their love, their support, their guardianship, and their words. Allow this to land in your nervous system. You belong. You are so, so loved. And your power is so safe here. And now imagine holding the hands of the younger version of you. And as you look into her eyes, together you bring in this new frequency. And you tell her, as you hug her and integrate her within your nervous system, I reclaim my place in the sisterhood. I release the fear and I choose love. And feel how she's integrating back into you. She's feeling loved and seen and welcomed and safe to return back from the exile. And if ever you don't see her as wanting to integrate back, if ever you don't see her as ready to come back home to you, that is absolutely okay. We're not pushing anything, we're not controlling anything, we are just observing. Take a moment with her. You can pause this video until she feels ready to integrate, to merge back with you, and ask her, what does she need to feel safe? Is there anything she would love to communicate with you? And take the moment to truly listen to her, to see her, to acknowledge her feelings, her emotions, but also her power, her resilience, and help her alchemize and release whatever is ready to be released. If you need to pause this video, pause for as long as you need. And when you're ready, I would love to invite you to thank that version of you for her deep medicine, for her resilience, for her power. All this time she was standing by you, protecting you in her own way, shape, and form. And we gotta thank all the beautiful women that came to hold you in the circle, all the guides, all the ancestors, knowing that their love is always with you, that you're always part of this beautiful, powerful circle of women. You cannot possibly be excluded. And whenever you need to feel like you belong, you can just call onto them. And they will come back, they will hold you, they will remind you just how powerful, how lovable, how incredibly worthy you are. And there's nothing that you need to do to deserve love. You are unconditionally loved because you exist. We're gonna thank this beautiful grotto, your inner temple, your safe space, for holding you. You're going to gently, gently going to go back up, back into this realm, into this reality. Wiggle your toes, wiggle your fingers. Come back here with us. Welcome back, beauty. I would love to invite you, if you desire to take this work even deeper, to have a little journaling session on those questions, to really bring more embodiment and, how can you carry this forward? How can I show up differently with women starting now? How can I show up differently with women starting now? And what vow or commitment do I want to make to the sisterhood? What vow or commitment do I want to make to the sisterhood? Because a lot of this work is, yes, about really listening and understanding and acknowledging the woundings and the patterns that run in ourselves. But I always think it's also about embodiment and way forward, and how we are going to walk this path and show up in this path. And we can only do it together. And it's through this embodiment and through this work that will literally change the fabric, the energetic field of sisterhood. So it could be different vows. It could be committing to celebrate women's beauty and brilliance, or choosing to collaborate instead of competing, or no longer abandoning yourself to be liked, because this is also a disservice not only to you but to the other women as well, and to the collective of the feminine. Or maybe there is something else, some other new reality that you would love to weave in and step forward into. Take the time to journal on this. Those are very powerful journaling prompts. If this was impactful and you feel the call to share, I'm always so happy to listen what came up for you. Feel free to send me a message. This is a safe space. And to close our beautiful circle, I would love to invite you to just tune into your heart. And as we opened this workshop with a beautiful anchoring invitation, I would also love to close this workshop with a little invocation. And you can say it out loud with me or just receive the frequency of it. But this is what I would love to anchor into the field and into what I would love to, the type of sisterhood I would love to call women into. And so we are not rivals. We are beautiful reflections and mirrors of each other, helping each other step deeper into self authenticity. And I no longer fear your light, my sister, nor do I dim my own. I release the lies that kept us apart, and I stand for sisterhood. I am free, you are free, we are free. And so it is. Thank you, love.